Also, Ms. Broad, just to dwell a little deeper in terms of how this complex geopolitical puzzle, of course, will play out, because at this moment as we speak, there's this war in Ukraine that's been raging for well over 16, 17 months now. United States and Russia, of course, do not see eye to eye. And at this moment, probably there is a lot of chatter that there needs to be a neutral interlocutor who can, of course, pull the right kind of levers, which could probably bring in some kind of peace in the battlefields of Ukraine. Now, India has got an interesting and an important foreign policy. It has pursued a policy of strategic autonomy, by which it means that it does not ally itself with any one power center, but rather pursues a policy that is beneficial to its own people. By doing this, what India has done is that it has got very good relations with the West. It's also got equally good relations with Russia and, to a certain extent, with China as well. Now, with that being the context, do you think India and Prime Minister Modi can also be an interlocutor for peace between Russia and the West?
Let's hope so. We should be under no illusions about the difficulty of that task, because Russia doesn't want to end the war. It wants to clearly wants to keep going until it has achieved some sort of significant gains significant enough for President Putin to be able to go back to the Russian people and say, look, it was worth the effort. Now we have so and so much Ukrainian territory that is ours. So it will be very difficult to mediate any sort of peace deal between Russia and Ukraine. But India certainly has a good shot at it. Now, we should remember that there is no shortage of countries trying to mediate. There's just been an African delegation of African leaders in Ukraine and Russia trying to mediate, but without any progress so far. But India, as you say, does have good relations with Russia without being under Russian domination. And so that would put India in a good position. And I think that the case to be made is that this war, it doesn't matter where you're located in the world, it would be a terrible thing for the world if another country could invade its neighbor and nobody would do anything about it. So that is the case I think India can make, that it's standing up for all the countries out there who risk being invaded by their neighbors.
Absolutely. My final question to you, Ms. Elizabeth Braw, is in terms of what is likely to be the future of Quad. Now, the Quad has got 4 democratic nations. It has got India, the United States, it's got Japan and Australia. This is not an alliance of sorts. This is, in fact, a grouping of democratic nations, and in some ways it has a huge bearing on the developments in the Indo-Pacific region. The Chinese have dismissed the Quad as the Eastern NATO. Do you think the Quad will now strengthen further?
Yeah, it's incredible, really. When the Quad was formed not that long ago, it seemed like a group in search of a mission. It seemed like a good idea for these countries to get together. But it wasn't really clear what they were getting together to do. And now there is so much they can do together, both in trade, in upholding democratic values, in perhaps even defense cooperation, because relations with China have deteriorated so significantly in just the past couple of years. And there is enormous opportunity now for the Quad to develop this grouping into a proper alliance. And clearly, China is concerned about exactly that, or otherwise it wouldn't try to discredit the Quad in the public domain. And I think what will be interesting to see is how much these 4 countries manage to expand and enhance their trade relations, because India has always been a country that so many companies have been wanting to invest in, especially in manufacturing, but there have always been problems with red tape and bureaucracy and so forth. If these 4 countries manage to enhance the trade relations between these 4 countries and make India, for example, an attractive and efficient destination for companies in these other countries to manufacturing, that could be a fantastic benefit.
Absolutely, indeed. Thank you very much indeed, Ms. Elizabeth Braw, for joining us and getting us all those insights there. And meanwhile, my colleague Siddhant Sibal is joining us back on this broadcast. Now, Siddhant, we just saw the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi being welcomed by the Bidens there. He's now, we're given to understand, just stepped inside of the White House. And in a few moments from now, the state dinner will, of course, get underway. There are about an estimated 400-odd guests who are on the invite list, who will, of course, be taking part. We see the Ambanis, a prominent business family from India, who are, of course, going to be a part of this state dinner. Siddhant, now this is a important. All right, we seem to have lost the line with my colleague Siddhant Sibal. We'll try and get him back on the line again. But this is a crucial moment. It's got everything in it. This is diplomacy at its very best. This is history as it is unfolding right in front of our eyes. Because what we are looking at is the United States waking up to a new geopolitical reality. The United States quite clearly is in need of allies because major European powers such as France and Germany have got a completely divergent approach in terms of how they intend to engage with China. Now remember, India and China have got issues of their own. The Chinese have a problem with the borders that India has with China. The Chinese do not recognize these borders that India inherited at the time of its independence. At the time that India became independent, the Chinese did not raise a lot of these objections that they are now coming up with. They're bringing out these strange ancient maps where they say that some territory belonged to some particular kingdom of China, some empire of China sometime in the past, and therefore that territory belongs to them. These are the kind of arguments that the Chinese have been putting forth, and ever since that gruesome and the deadly clash that took place on the 15th of June in the Galwan Valley in 2020, the border standoff between India and China has been a serious one. So there are obvious tensions between India and China, but except for that, the other aspects of the India-China equation are, of course, pretty robust. But what we are looking at in terms of how the geopolitics is playing out is that the United States, which is at this moment the most militarily powerful and economically the most dominant nation in the world, is sensing a certain threat to its position at the top of the perch by the Chinese, who are making rapid strides, which is why the United States is obviously looking for allies to somehow try and blunt the rise of China. For the last decade and a half, the American policy has been dictated with one burning ambition, and that has been to try and somehow to contain the rise of China. And this realignment that the United States is attempting is quite clearly because of the rise of China that we are looking at, and that is the unstated elephant in the room. So when you look at what is unfolding at this moment at the White House, you need to also recognize the elephant in the room, which is China, which is quite clearly absent. But the Americans are pulling out all stops in order to try and woo India to see whether India can be weaned away from the Russian military hardware and whether India can in fact be made a more closer ally. But remember, the Indian foreign policy is dictated by a very practical and a principled approach. The time of non-alignment has perhaps ended after the end of the Cold War, where there are no more two big superpowers who are having a go at each other. But at this moment, as we speak, India's foreign policy is dictated by a very practical consideration, and this is that of strategic autonomy. India follows a foreign policy that is in the interest of India's own people, which is why India, despite the fact that there are contending powers in the world, has good speaking relations with pretty much every camp there is, and which is why India is such an important power of its own. And a lot of analysts also in fact indicate that India is a pole of its own, and this is something that India has not openly come out and stated, but this remains a fact which has been recognized by other major powers, which is why India is taken so seriously in the geopolitical context. So we expect the state dinner to begin any moment now. The guests are still walking in. They're making their way into the White House for the state dinner that's been laid out for the Indian Prime Minister, who's a state guest in the United States of America at this moment.